I look around the room before I ask my question to start our thought process today in this passage. And I just realized, man, there's tons of stuff. We come together on a Sunday morning. We see each other. Some of us haven't seen each other since the last Sunday morning. And there have been 7 days that have gone between then and now. And there's tons of things that have gone on in each individual life. Every family, I guarantee you, can point out highs and lows over this past week. And then we come in here, and sometimes it's a little bit of like, we put on a face sometimes of everything's great, everything's cool. The classic, how are you doing? I'm fine. Maybe you're not. So I'm just praying for us right now. To be honest with ourselves, and where we're not fine, to be okay with that. Not okay and happy in the circumstance, but okay to acknowledge it, state it, bring it to the Lord, and trust Him for some resolution and some help there. So we're gonna go into this today, trusting Him and trusting His Spirit to open our hearts and work in our souls to just drive us into something that's deep enough to carry us when things are great and when things are not great, to a faith in Him that helps us to sustain. So let me begin this morning with a quick question for you. This is a question for everybody from 6 years old or 5 years old all the way up to however old. Me old. So here's the question. What do you want more than anything else in this world? I want you to think, and what are the first things that come to your mind? What do you want more than anything else in this world? Some things that might come to mind. Anybody in here want to be a professional athlete? Come on. Collins, I love it. Me too, brother. Hey, me too. I'm with you. There's a couple of us. How many of you, the thing that comes to mind might be, you would like to make generational wealth? Quit my job and just manage my money. How many of you, the thought came to mind, I would love to have a happy life with a spouse. That's what I look forward to one day possibly. Or we could actually turn that on the other end. How many of you would like, I really would love to have a happy life without a spouse? I'm not talking to you people that are married. But how many of you might think that? Or maybe this one's one for our day and time. Maybe the thought came, I would love to be an influencer. Isn't that kind of the thing to do today? I want to be an influencer. I want to be a governmental influencer, so we've got elections coming and people that are running for office. I want to be a business influencer. I want to go out there and be a CEO or somehow run a company and tell people how to do what they're supposed to do. Or I want to be a social media influencer. So let me take pictures that are not real for you to think that my life is perfect and yours can't be, but you can try. Or I'm even inspired to add in here, maybe some of you, your thing you want more than anything in life is to go down to a tropical place and put on your tropical shirt and sit on the sand. Just enjoy nothingness. Daniel, man, it's got to be going through your head right now. It's warm in here. But I love the fact that even when it's cold outside, you brought the warmth. So we've got all sorts of things that go through our mind, right, about what is it that I want more than anything in this world. Let me have a follow-up question, though. Hopefully you thought of a thing or two. What would you be willing to give up in order to get it? So you've thought through some things you want, but I'm wondering if you want it more than anything in the world. Because what would you be willing to give up in order to get it? Like for those of you out there, for those of us out there who want to be a professional athlete, are we willing to put in the training, to developing the physical skills, and to take the risk of failure, setting all the other things that are fun and that everybody else gets to do aside in order to achieve that goal? Or Perhaps generational wealth was your thought. Are you willing to put in the long hours to deny yourself of the immediate gratifications? Are you willing to get the economic education it takes to do that? And are you willing to take the risks financially to get there? Perhaps, again, have life with a spouse. Are you willing, honestly, to give up your independence and your freedom and to merge your plans with another person that you don't know what their plans are going to be in 10 years? Are you willing to risk rejection? And the flip side, perhaps what you're saying is, I'm at a place I'm going to be happy without a spouse. I don't need a spouse. Are you willing to take on the responsibility for your own self without somebody to go along with you? Are you willing to risk the loneliness that might be a part of that? If you want to be an influencer, are you willing to meet with person after person and volunteer your time and network and stick your neck out to public opinion that you know eventually you're going to be slashed? If you truly want something more than anything else in this world, it's going to require a total commitment of the whole person in order to attain the desired place or person or possession that you say you want. They have a little logo that goes in Clemson University football. Dabo Sweeney and them have it. They've won a couple of national championships, so it seems to have worked for them, but their logo is all in. You can see it if you watch a football game. They have it written on the strap of their chin strap. All in. There are no half measures. If there's something you want more than anything, there's no holding back anything that you're not willing if you're saying, I want that more than anything. It's going to require sacrifice. To have one thing, you must let go of some other things. So I want you to rethink your question. The question of, what do you want more than anything else in this world? Rethink it. What are you willing to give up to get that? Is there anything you're not willing to give up in order to get that? You might even start asking yourself the natural question that follows up on that of this: why would I give up these things that's required for me to lay aside in order to have that? So I do believe that today's text is calling for such an all-in response from us. However, here's the beauty. This all-in response is not one of drudgery. It's actually an all-in response that is full of delight. Why? Because of this. The thing that the text is driving us to consider is realized to be worth more than anything else you could possibly pursue. In a phrase, our text today is going to drive this home to us. So if you want to catch what it's driving at, it's this: Jesus and his kingdom is of more value than any of the alternatives that the kingdom of this world can offer. Pursue it with all you have. I'll say that again. Jesus and his kingdom is of more value than any of the alternatives that the kingdom of this world can offer. Pursue it with all you have. We're going to look at a text that's going to actually make this point with two illustrations, something we'll call parables. We'll speak of that in a moment. The first illustration is going to be the illustration of hidden treasure. And the second illustration we want to consider is the illustration of a costly pearl. Both of these are representing the value of Jesus and his kingdom, Jesus and his way. And both of them are calling for a response to the discovery of all that he is. And that response is, sell everything you have in order to get it. Now, these are fine statements to be made. In fact, the way he does it with an illustration are very neat and memorable stories for us. But where are they coming from? Where does Jesus just dump on us that being with me and following my kingdom way is like a hidden treasure or a costly pearl? What leads Jesus to use these stories, and why does he promote the kingdom message using them? So in order for us to kind of catch where that's coming from and where it's going, let's glance back at Matthew's overall narrative track that he's been taking to use these stunning and graphic and confronting calls to everybody who's going to hear and understand what he's saying. So here's what we've seen so far in Matthew's gospel before we come to Matthew 13, verses 45 to 46. It began and opened with the fact that Jesus is the prophetic fulfillment of the promised rescuer. We saw that in those first 4 chapters. He moves then to tell you what's the way of the kingdom, what's the kingdom message. He does that in chapters 5 through 7 with the first discourse that Matthew structures his gospel around, what we call the Sermon on the Mount. He moves from there into the wonders of the kingdom. The ways of the kingdom is 5 through 7. The wonders of the kingdom is chapters 8 through 9, where he helps us to see that miracles break in, and the things that are broken are fixed, they're redeemed, they're restored. But he goes from there to show that there'll be conflict in the kingdom that ultimately is given the promise of rest. That's sort of where we ended yesterday. Yesterday, listen to me. My week's kind of compressed into one. Last week. From chapter 11, where Jesus promises rest, he makes a segue from this promise of rest to those who are laborers in the kingdom to a valuing of the kingdom as treasure in chapters 12 through 13. Here's how he does it. He's going to actually enter into, in chapter 12, a discussion about the controversies about rest. You remember last week, got it right that time, we talked about Jesus telling you, I promise you rest. Every one of you, come to me. My yoke is easy. This is real rest. Well, immediately after that, there's going to be controversy over what rest is. Chapter 12 is full of opposition coming at Jesus now. There's going to be traps set, specifically here by the group called the Pharisees. They're going to try to trap Jesus over rule breaking. They're going to then try to trap Jesus over his alien alliances. And then they're lastly going to trap Jesus with a call to be sensational and get attention on yourself. Here's how he does that. The trap over rule breaking. They come to him after they watch Jesus' disciples walking through a field. They're hungry. We don't really understand this. We don't live this way. But as they walk through the field, they're hungry. They end up pulling grain heads off of the wheat or barley or whatever it is, and they're eating them. And the Pharisees see that, and they say, wait a second, do you see what you're doing? You're violating Sabbath law. You're not supposed to work the field for food on the Sabbath. Jesus moves on from there to where he's actually challenged with regards to helping people. He moves in from there, and he actually helps with a person who has, hang on just a second, a withered hand. A withered hand, and Jesus asks, is it lawful to help that person on the Sabbath? And he tells the person to put his hand down, his hand's whole. Jesus asks those opposers to say, consider your own laws. Do you remember the stories from the Old Testament? You remember David and his men? They were going along following the Lord's way, and they were hungry, and they ended up eating the bread off of the table in the tabernacle that was dedicated to the priest. If you have an animal that falls in the ditch along the way, you're going to get it out, aren't you? And break the Sabbath laws of rest. Jesus confronts them in their attack. And he then from that moves on and encourages his followers, say, look, let's not make a big deal about this. Keep a low profile. It fulfills Scripture. So they try to trap him with rule breaking about rest that were just superficial, overarching layers that they had put that weren't real. And Jesus blows it up about with what real rest is. He then moves on to, if we can't get you with breaking rules, we're going to get you with alien alliances. Jesus is presented with a man who is blind and deaf. And the scriptures tell us it's because he was filled with a demon. So Jesus actually heals him and relieves him of this oppression. It was done on the Sabbath. And so he's confronted with the fact that he did this. But he's also then confronted with this fact. Let's see if we can't distort this one who's being set forward as the possible Savior. And you know what? I know how he's doing this. He's doing this because he's in cahoots with the devil himself. So he's casting out demons by the power of the prince of demons. And Jesus, he just confronts that, man. He says, wait a second. You need to apply that same rule to your own exorcists. You guys are casting out demons. Are you applying that to them as well? And more than that, you know the famous lines about a house divided against itself will soon fall. And he says, this is going to happen. It happens in court, it happens in houses, and it happens in Satan's domain. No kingdom divided is going to survive. Actually, what you just saw was evidence of the kingdom come. And Jesus then becomes more upfront with his confrontation. He says, I want to tell you guys something. You should not suppress the Holy Spirit. When you see the Spirit moving like this, your suppression of it is cause for your condemnation. If you want to know if this is real or not, look at the fruit. If it's good fruit, people healed, and so, then you can see that the tree's healthy. And then he goes right at the heart of his accusers, and he says, you guys are a snake pit. Anybody been called like you're just a snake? You're a dirty, rotten scoundrel. You're a snake pit's what he says. He says that because it's out of the heart that the words have meaning. It's not just the words themselves. He's attacking everything that is superficial and driving down to the heart of the issue. Last part of this tension, this conflict in the kingdom, this segue between rest and treasure is he then points to the sign of Jonah. These Pharisees who've tried to trap him with rule breaking, who've tried to attack him because he's aligned with the devil somehow, now are going to attack him saying, hey, look, tell you what, do a miracle. Show us something special. I mean, I'm sitting here scratching my head when I read that, like, how many miracles have you already seen, for one thing? But Jesus looks him square in the eye and says, I'll give you no sign via a miracle. The sign that you will see that will prove it is the sign of Jonah. Y'all remember the story of Jonah? Remember what happens there? He said, just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, so the Son of Man will be 3 days and 3 nights in the earth. He's pointing towards his resurrection. You want to see an ultimate sign? Here's where it's coming. It's going to be the resurrection. And then he kind of goes at, I'm telling you about Jonah. Let me tell you something about Jonah's ministry. He went to Nineveh. You remember that? Nineveh's a pagan town. And when he preached the message, what did the people in Nineveh do? They heard the message and repented, and they didn't ask for any miracles. I mean, the Queen of Sheba from Ethiopia came up to get her wisdom from Solomon. And when she came to Solomon for wisdom, she didn't ask for any miracles. And he looks him square in the eye and he says, you guys are cleaned up with your rituals. Good for you. But you've rejected the kingdom message when it has come. I'm going to tell you what you're like. You just accused me of doing this by the prince of the devil. Here's what you're like. A person who cleans out the house but doesn't fill it back with what's good is like the person who has a demon that's kicked out. That demon goes wandering looking for someone else. You're cleaned out, but you've replaced it with not the right kingdom message. And when they come back, not only do they come, but 7 others with them come. And you are worse than you were at the start. He has a little segment here where he replaces the place of rest and security. His mom and brothers and sisters come, and he says, who is my mom and my brothers and my sisters? It's those who follow the Father's will. These are my family. That brings us to chapter 13. Chapter 13 is actually the third discourse in Matthew's gospel. He's building his narrative around these discourses. The first one was the Sermon on the Mount. The second one was in chapter 10, which is basically that mission statement. This one we could call the Sermon on the Shore. Jesus ends up going out of the house and sitting on the seaside. And while he's sitting on the seaside, because of all that's happened, crowds come. And so when the crowds come, he ends up saying, hey, let's get in a boat, push out into the water, and then he begins to teach. And as he teach, his sermon was a sermon of stories. A sermon of what we call parables. And we use the term parable because it's a transliteration of the Greek word parabolos. A parable is this. It's a comparison for the sake of teaching. There's 23 parables in Matthew's gospel. The Hebrew word that's used for this is a word that actually means a riddle. You remember Samson, when he was confronted, ended up giving the riddle, out of the eater, I get something to eat. Out of the strong comes sweetness. And that was where he had gotten honey out of the carcass of a lion. So that was the Hebrew word used for this kind of teaching. The Greek word speaks about a comparison. It literally means to throw together. So you take one thing and another, throw them together, and then it helps to draw a conclusion. It might be through similarities. It might be through contrast. Why does he do this? There's a couple of reasons that we could propose. One of the reasons is because opposition is ramping up. And Jesus, as the wisest of all, instead of just being direct, now ends up teaching in parables so that those who have ears to hear will hear, and those without ears to hear won't have a clue. Secondly, it's not just to hide his message, it's actually a desire to put the message in an understandable format so that you can actually see what he's saying. He uses like human everyday experience to help you understand these spiritual realities. And lastly, here's what this does. When you hear a parable, it actually doesn't just lay something out. It calls for a decision. It's requiring you to say, oh, that's right. Oh, that applies. So this is what Jesus is doing here. He does it in chapter 13 through a series of these things. The first one is he talks about the farmer's seed and the different soils. You've heard that, right? Farmer goes out, scatters. You've got rocky soil, it's taken. You've got shallow soil, sprouts quick and dies when the sun comes out. You've got thorns. It comes up, but it's choked out by the cares of the world. And then you've got the good soil. So he teaches in that way, and he tells us, after telling that in chapter 13, the reason he's doing this is to help ready the people to hear the revelation of who he is. He explains this farmer's story, the fact that the heart is made ready to receive truth, and we want you to be that good soil. He moves on with, while he's out in the boat, 3 other parables that it shares with us. The farmer's field of wheat that's mixed with the enemy's thistles. The farmer's, then thirdly, small seed that becomes a mighty tree. And then fourthly, out there, he talks about a woman who's kneading dough. Anybody here make bread? The woman who's kneading dough, and she puts leaven in it, or yeast, and it permeates the entire batch. All these things are taught in a way to fulfill prophecy. He points a couple of times to this. After he finishes teaching on the shore, it says he comes back in and he goes back into the house. And when he goes back into the house, he gives the explanation of what the story about the wheat and the thistles was, the wheat and the tares, you might think of it as. And then he gives 3 more parables, 2 of which we want to look at today. So when we come to Matthew chapter 13, verses 44 to 46, this is going to be the crux of what we want to get at today. And that is hidden treasure and costly pearls prepared through stories for the Son of God. There's 2 parables here. They need to be held as a package. There's similarity and contrast in both of them. The first parable speaks of hidden treasure discovered. You read it there in verse 44. The kingdom of heaven is like treasure hidden in a field, which a man found and covered up. Then in his joy, he goes and sells all that he has and he buys that field. The second, there's a superior pearl that's found, verses 45 to 46. Again, the kingdom of heaven is like a merchant in search of fine pearls, who on finding one pearl of great value went and sold all that he had and he bought it. The stories here illustrate finding the kingdom of heaven. This kingdom that was introduced back in chapter 4, with the kingdom of heaven is here. It's articulated in chapters 5 through 7, and then it's demonstrated in chapters 8 through 9. The hidden treasure. I want you to think with me as we look at this story. Who is the character in the story? Who is it? Who's the person in the story? It's who? No, Matthew's writing the story. But who's the person? It says the kingdom of heaven is like a treasure hidden in a field, which a man. So the main character is a man. And where is this man? He's in a field. So we're immediately taken to draw our minds towards a common laborer, most likely a poor person working on somebody else's land. And in the mundane course of his life, he just happens upon a treasure. Wasn't looking for it, but there it was. It says that he covers it up. It probably means he's plowing or he's digging for another person. And as he does the task, boom, there it is. Well, when he sees it, what response does he have? Huh? So the first thing he does is covers it up. And then what does it say he moves forward in? Is it like, What? He does. But I want you to see what's the emotion. What's the disposition of his heart? Joy. I mean, look. Let's go back to that generational wealth dream. If you hit the jackpot, or if you hit the lottery, which none of you in here are playing, I'm sure, but if you did, what would be your response to your mega millions? Oh well, no big deal. Or let's take it out of the gambling world. And let's go over to you had invested in an endeavor that actually made it. Internationally, just made it, and the money is just coming in faster than you can even comprehend. What would be your response? It would probably be joy. So this person in the everyday, ordinary affair of life comes across something that, whoa, this is amazing. He covers it up, and in joy, it says he goes and does exactly what Levi said. He goes and sells everything in order to buy the one thing, right? So hold on to that. I mean, when you think of it, would you be willing to sell everything? Would you sell your Pokemon card collection? Would you sell your family heirloom? Would you sell your favorite recliner? He did it because the treasure attached to the field that he bought, when he compared it to all those other things, there's no comparison. I'll sell all of that in order to get this. Second illustration Jesus uses. Who's the character in this story? The first one was the man in the field. Who's the character here? It's a merchant. And what is this merchant doing? Is he just happening along in kind of a random, whoa, there it is. What is he doing? What's the verbal that it uses there? What is he? It says he's searching. So this merchant, a person of means most likely, and a connoisseur of what's valuable, intentionally is seeking for the thing of the most value. And it says this merchant finds a pearl of great price. What's his response? What does he do? Oh, he sells everything too. The favorite recliner's gone. In order to go and buy that pearl. Do you see the contrast and the connections? All sorts of people find this kingdom. The poor and the rich. The ones who are diligently looking, and sometimes it's those who it comes and smacks them in the face. But the response to both is the same. When you find that thing that is of the greatest value, you sell everything else you have. You don't hold on to anything in order to give up that. You give this up in order to have that. Make sense? What does this mean for us? The thesis we gave earlier, drawn from the illustration, is this: that Jesus and his kingdom are more valuable than any of the alternatives that the kingdom of this world can offer. Pursue it with all that you have. Now, whether you buy it or not, the parable's assertion is this: Jesus is the treasure that supersedes all others. The question to the listener, like we say, parables call for a decision. The question to the listener is evident. Is Jesus my superseding treasure? Think of those who have followed Jesus and what they have been willing to give up, not begrudgingly, but with joy for what they gained. Even in this, the writer of this gospel, Matthew, he was a tax collector. He had a political position and financial security, and he gave all of those prospects up to follow Jesus. You had Peter, James, and John. You remember their story? It may seem common to us, but they had family businesses. They were established with those businesses, and they gave them up in order to follow Jesus. Contrast that with a story we see in Matthew chapter 19. There's a rich young man who comes to Jesus and says, "What do I need to do to inherit eternal life?" And Jesus says, you know this, love the Lord your God. You know this commandments. What are they? Yeah, love your neighbor as yourself and love God. And so Jesus starts reeling off the different externals. And that guy says, "I've done all these things. What more do I need to do?" And Jesus, he ends up saying, and does this sound similar to the parable? Sell everything that you have and follow me. How does that man respond? He goes away sad because he had great possessions. He had money, yes. But more than money, he had religious community. He was a rule keeper. He had economic stability in his group. Paul later comes along as an apostle born out of time, he says. In Philippians chapter 3, he tells us, if you want to talk about having possessions that you could count on, I'm better than the rest of you. And he gives this laundry list of ways he's kept the rules and he made the grade. But he ends up stating very clearly, any gain that I had, I counted as loss in order that I may have Christ. I've used this illustration before, and it's outside of Scripture. It's a person from the actual 3rd century, early 200s. But I think it just fits so well. There's a person in church history, her name is Vivia Perpetua. Vivia Perpetua was a noble woman, born of high status. She was well educated. Actually, the reason we have this is because she herself was able to keep a diary. She was young. She was 22 years old, and all of life was ahead of her. She had just been married and recently had a child. So anything you can talk about, I'm going to grab a hold of that for my meaning. She had it. But her story is not just hers. Her story is also connected to a young lady, a couple of young ladies actually. But there's one specifically mentioned, Felicitas is her name, or we might would say Felicity. As opposed to being a noblewoman, Felicity was a pregnant slave girl. Both of these persons lived in the 3rd century AD in North Africa in a place called Carthage. They had recently become believers in Jesus Christ, both of them. Again, rich, poor, but both had given themselves to Jesus. And they were recent believers, which that means they were actually being under the tutelage of the church, but they'd not been yet baptized. Well, there was an edict that was put out by the emperor at that time. His name was Septimius Severus. That there could be no new converts to this way, this Christianity. So they ended up picking out persons who were of these persons' description. They had just become believers, not yet completely in. And so they ended up arresting these persons, both Vibia Perpetua and Felicity, along with 4 others. And they sentenced them to execution in the military games that would celebrate Severus's birthday. And it was a long imprisonment because their aim was to humiliate Christianity and have them recant. Perpetua's father actually came to her and asked her, please, 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 recant and save your life. Do it for the sake of your baby. Her answer to him was this: everyone has a name, and it can't be changed. My name is Christian, and it cannot be changed. She was sentenced to be thrown into the arena. Others had gone before her, and different animals had committed their execution. She and Felicity together come out, and their way of death was going to be that they would have a ferocious cow, like a mad cow, come out. And after they had gone through the process of being thrown by this cow, they were bloodied and they were beaten. Soldiers then came out with swords to end their life. Amazing. Perpetua asked, before you do, can I tie my hair back up? Because in her day, hair that was down, which you can imagine, after which was a sign of mourning. She said, this is a day of joy. Put her hair back up and met her end at the sword of soldiers. How in the world can a young woman of noble status, with a husband, with a nursing infant baby, how can that person say this? Choose this. There's only one way. I think it's articulated incredibly well. In Psalm 16, this is what she held to. She said, preserve me, O God, for in you I take refuge. I say to the Lord, you are my Lord. I have no good apart from you. The Lord is my chosen portion and my cup. You hold my lot. The lines have fallen for me in pleasant places indeed. I have a beautiful inheritance. Therefore, my heart is glad. My whole being rejoices. My flesh dwells secure, because you have made known to me the path of life. In your presence, there is fullness of joy. At your right hand are pleasures forevermore. I don't know what's competing in your soul right now for your affection. The world is full of competitors. And man, they look really attractive. But the text is screaming, the parable is screaming to you right now. there's a treasure, there's a perfect pearl that is worth more than anything you could possibly substitute it with. Stop chasing that. Stop holding on to that. Pursue the treasure that lasts. Pursue the treasure that's true. Pursue the treasure that's yours through Christ.